Hi, so with this being a new channel, I want to be able to provide my opinions and thoughts on each character, so I figured I'd start this little series to be able to do that. For now, it's going to be based around Three Houses, as that's the game I'm actively playing on here. However, when I play other games in the future, I'll probably transition this series over with it, so I can talk about those characters too. I'm going to give a warning in advance that these will probably be longer than they need to be and probably be fairly rambly, but I want to make sure I can go into as much detail as I want to and say everything I feel is necessary to say. Also, please note that for all of these, we will be considering maddening difficulty where relevant. Also, we'll be considering New Game, not New Game Plus, and finally, there will potentially be spoilers mentioned in these, so take that into consideration before watching. So, without further ado, let's get into Three Houses' Avatar character, Byleth. The first thing to touch on is the gender differences. Whilst there aren't too many, they are definitely worth talking about. The first thing that they affect are the gender-locked classes. Male Byleth gets access to Brawler, Grappler, War Master, Hero, Dark Mage, Dark Bishop, and War Monk, whereas female gets Pegasus Knight, Falcon Knight, Grimoire, Valkyrie Knight, Dark Flyer, and War Cleric. Male does have a slight edge on quantity, but female absolutely wins on quality. Pegasus Knight alone is a huge boon, allowing Byleth to gain flying ranks with significantly more ease, and making transition to what I believe to be their best class, Wyvern Lord, so much easier. Falcon Knight is also a valid late game option, although I do prefer the Wyvern variant. Male Byleth is still strong, definitely, especially with things like War Master, where you can focus more on brawling and axes, but I think overall the female classes definitely take the cake. The other big benefit of female Byleth is the ability to instantly recruit Sylvain with no other requirements before Chapter 2. Not only does this give you access to a very strong unit very easily, but you'll also have access to his relic weapon, the Lance of Ruin, after Chapter 5, which is the earliest relic you can get outside of the Sword of the Creator. This advantage is completely uncontested by the male variant, and only further pushes the edge even higher for female Byleth. There are some other potential considerations when choosing the gender, such as unit composition. A good example of this is the Golden Deer having Leonie and Hilda, who both benefit male units. However, this is significantly much more of a minor factor compared to the others that we've mentioned so far. Now, we absolutely have to talk about Byleth's personal ability, Professor's Guidance, which gives a 1.2 times EXP gain to Byleth and any adjacent units. This is ludicrously strong, and I genuinely think you could put this on any unit in the game, and it would make them an immediate contender for S tier, regardless of what else they have on their kit. The amounts that this helps your units grow, if utilised properly, is incredibly impactful, especially in Three Houses, where any character is capable of using a ranged weapon while positioned next to Byleth, and it will also allow Byleth to level very easily too. After Chapter 10, this also upgrades into Professor's Guidance Plus, which does the same thing, except it also gives a +2 bonus to damage to Byleth. This isn't hugely impactful, but it is nice, especially on multi-hit weapons such as gauntlets or brave weaponry. Overall, the potency of the EXP gain, not only on Byleth but also their allies, is a large part of what makes them such a powerful unit. Coming to you as a level 1 commoner, Byleth doesn't start with any class abilities, and the personal abilities are relatively standard, although Sword Prowess 2 and Brawling Prowess 1 are nice to have, especially for the early chapters. Most of the personal abilities that Byleth picks up are relatively standard stuff. However, Rally Movement at S Authority is a nice one that can occasionally come in handy, and is only shared between Byleth and Annette. Other than that, Battalion Vantage can always be useful for enemy phasing, and Model Leader at C+ Authority can help with leveling battalions quickly, especially in auxiliary battles where you can afford to go in without your strongest loadout. But past this, nothing really leaps out that is that rare or limited or exclusive to Byleth. Looking at combat arts, Byleth starts with Wrath Strike, which despite being overshadowed by things such as Tempest Lance or Curve Shot in the early game, is still nice to have. The only combat arts which are particularly notable here are Windsweep, unlocked at A swords and only available to a small handful of units, and is a very potent ability which stops enemy counterattacks. And the other one is the Byleth exclusive skill linked to the Sword of the Creator, Ruptured Heaven or Sublime Heaven in the later game. We should probably briefly touch on the Sword of the Creator here. Whilst not being strictly Byleth exclusive, it loses so much power in the hands of anyone else that it might as well be. When wielded by Byleth, it has access to the aforementioned combat arts, it has 10 reduced weight, and most importantly, it grants a 1-2 ranged sword attack. A common flaw of sword-locked lords in previous titles, such as Erica, Lyn, or Ike, is the lack of easy access to 1-2 ranged weapons to be able to effectively counterattack both ranged and melee enemies on the same turn. Byleth being presented with the opportunity to do this upon completing Chapter 4 does a lot to alleviate this weakness, and despite Byleth not being sword locked, it does give more merit to sticking with the weapon type that other units don't have. This is also a good time to briefly touch on the Enlightened One class, which is unique to Byleth and unlocked following Chapter 10 and automatically gained, you don't have to qualify for it or anything like that. Whilst I do think there are better options for Byleth, it's always a viable late game option. And it does come with some advantages, such as being able to use magic as well as brawling and all of the melee weapons as well. If you do choose to remain as Enlightened One, Byleth will be versatile and remain effective as both an active combatant and offering support to your other units. The Mastery skill can also be useful, causing adjacent allies to deal 3 more damage and take 3 less, so it's always a valid consideration. One upside that Byleth does have is that none of their skills are weaknesses, meaning it never takes too much effort to steer them down the path which you want to go down. This includes the previously mentioned flying path, eventually going into Wyvern Lord or Falconite, or going down War Master, which is also aided by a boon in brawling. Authority is also a very nice boon to have at all times, as it allows access to higher requirement battalions much earlier. With regards to leveling these skills, Byleth is in a very unique situation, being the only character who cannot be tutored. This means that outside of raising these stats via combat, the only way to raise them is through faculty training or seminars, the former of which uses activity points, which can be quite in demand in the early game, and relies on the faculty being available to teach the skill which you want, which can be very limited, especially for certain stats. Heavy armor springs immediately to mind. The second option there, seminars, uses up an entire weekend and means that you can't explore or do auxiliary and paralog battles. This is a large part of what makes access to Pegasus Knight so critical for female Byleth, as it can be difficult for male Byleth to raise their flying otherwise. Fortunately, as you enter Part 2, this eases up significantly, as not only will you have access to more activity points by now, but all recruited units are able to train you. This drawback can cause issues in the early stages of the game, however it can also usually be planned around to ensure your stats are where they need to be. Furthermore, the Enlightened One class can always be used if you have difficulty qualifying Byleth for late game classes. In terms of base stats, by far the standout is Byleth's Strength, starting off at 13 at level 1, which is tied for the highest in the game with Edelgard. Byleth also boasts respectable early game bulk, with a base HP of 27 and a defense of 6. While a handful of units can do better in this regard, it's still more than enough for Byleth to be able to look after themselves in the early game. Their speed is also acceptable, starting at 8, only beaten by characters on the faster end of the spectrum such as Petra, Yuri, and Leone. This is usually enough for Byleth to be able to avoid being doubled by most units early on, although some still will, such as early game Myrmidons. Whilst none of Byleth's growths are exceptional, they're mostly pretty good across the board. 45% in HP, Strength, Dex, Speed, Luck, and Charm allows Byleth to develop very well in most of these areas most of the time, and none of the other 3 are particularly terrible. 35% for Magic and Defense, and 30% for Resistance. This allows a lot of flexibility in the path you choose to take your Byleth down, which can be a major benefit. Byleth's spell list leaves a lot to be desired. Whilst nothing atrocious, a lack of access to Physic gates their potential as a healer significantly, and not having access to any of the other major faith spells, such as Warp or Rescue, doesn't help that cause either. Meanwhile, their Reason spell list presents very little that draws the eye, and nothing makes that path particularly appetizing to pursue. Ultimately, unless you're using Byleth as a mage just for fun, I find it more optimal to stay away from this, focus on the physical weapons, and only occasionally use Faith Magic if it's accessible to your class and necessary to restore health to allies. The final topic which is important to touch on is Biles Crest, the Major Crest of Flames. This has a 20% chance to restore 30% of damage dealt by Byleth that round, and should that be successful, there is also a 25% chance for a boost of 5 might to your damage. Similarly to many crests, this is too unreliable to factor in, however the heal is frequent enough that it can definitely be a benefit to helping Byleth top up on health, especially in the early game where healing magic can be in short supply. The damage boost is nice when it happens, but at a 5% activation rate, even by crest standards, it's so infrequent that it is essentially a non-factor. The other large benefit of Byleth having a crest is it allows them to make use of any of the relic weapons you find throughout the playthrough of your game without taking damage themselves. This can be handy as you complete paralogs, giving you access to more and more equipment that may go unused if you aren't actively using those characters, especially with Byleth's well-rounded stats and a lack of skill weaknesses, allowing them to effectively use any weapon type. Ultimately, Byleth's stats and skills will almost always result in a very potent unit for your team. Whilst being well-rounded can often be a drawback, causing a character to struggle to excel in any particular area, Byleth dodges this trap, and instead thrives in many areas, being an effective combat unit from start to end of game, and being able to provide a notable amount of support to other units too. I feel that going down the Wyvern Lord path with female Byleth is the best route for them to go to get the most from this unit. However, almost any option is viable, and should you want a solid mix of everything or an easy class to qualify for, considering the potential difficulties of qualifying for other classes, Enlightened One is always an excellent option to have. Whilst not being on the level of the best lords in the franchise, such as Sigurd and Robin, Byleth absolutely has their own standout qualities, and is an outstanding asset to any team. You'll never feel hindered with their force deployment, and Byleth absolutely has potential to compete as an elite unit within the game. The utility they provide to the team, especially through their personal skill, will also always be a massive help. I really hope you enjoyed this summary of Byleth, and I hope it conveyed my opinion of them well. If you have any thoughts, any disagreements, or any points you would like to raise of your own, I'd love to hear them, and thank you for watching.